My name is Wesley King. I'm a #1 New York Times and USA Today bestselling author, middle grade and young adult author. Books like O.C. Daniel, like the Wizenard Series, which I wrote with my late great friend and collaborator Kobe Bryant, The World Below, and a bunch of others, including the one that I'm going to be reading from very, very briefly today, which is called Sara and the Search for Normal. And this book, which was due to come out on May 5th, as so many other books, there was a delay due to COVID-19. It's now coming out June 4th. I think we're just going to put it out and hope for the best. And I'm going to do a couple of very small excerpt readings. That way, if somebody joins, they won't be lost halfway through a longer reading. A couple of readings essentially of maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes, these little tiny excerpts. And hopefully have questions afterward and throughout. I'll stop in between each excerpt, and if people want to post questions, I'm happy to answer those at any time as well. So if you are joining, once again, Wesley King. I am a Canadian author. I'm speaking today from Nova Scotia, Canada, Lake Echo, actually, which for you Maritimers or those who have been out into the Maritimes, we're about only 10 minutes from Dartmouth, Halifax, and it's a beautiful sunny day, and perhaps many of us would generally be out and about, but hopefully you're safely social distancing, and hopefully we'll all resume a bit of normalcy soon. So yes, I'm a Canadian author of a great number of books, and I'm going to do a little short reading today from Sara and the Search for Normal, which is the prequel to O.C. Daniel. For those who haven't read O.C. Daniel, it deals with my own experiences as a kid growing up with obsessive-compulsive disorder, general anxiety disorder, and panic disorder. And at the time when I was growing up, I didn't know what I had. So these were more so intangible issues that I was dealing with rather than actual diagnosed disorders. So O.C. Daniel was the story of how Daniel came to learn what he had, and partly through the intervention of this enigmatic character named Sara Malvern. And the book came out, and to my great shock, became popular around the world. I think so many of us connected with anxiety disorders and with depressive disorders because so many of us are facing with them. And I suspect a lot of us are seeing those issues exacerbated right now in this current climate. So I'm glad to put out this book next, which deals with Sara Malvern and her experience of being a kid facing these disorders and her search for normalcy and how she could define her own sense of normalcy. And the book is interspersed with notes, and these notes essentially summarize things that she's thinking about. They're almost a chance for her to directly address the reader, and I'll give you the first one of the book, and to give you an idea of sort of the nature of this. So this is from Sara and the Search for Normal, which again comes out June 4th, and this is the first note in the book. And as you can see, they're written quite literally as a note. And this reads, "If you ask a blue whale what she thinks about, if you sing whale, of course, you might be surprised. Most people would guess it was about krill or ocean currents, or maybe if she was due for some air. But it could also be about her baby, who swam off 2 years ago, and whether he found a girlfriend. Or that dolphins really are silly things. Or maybe that the stars look beautiful tonight, even from underwater. We can't ask her, so we all just kind of assume it's the krill. Do me a favor, even if it's just for this one story. Assume it's the stars." So you can see sort of the ethereal sense in which she deals with these things. And I'll read you another little segment here as well. This one is perhaps going to be familiar for those of us who are dealing with disorders. And again, this book is middle grade, so it's more than suitable for kids 8 and up. And I thought that was very important because I wanted kids to see themselves in this literature, kids who are dealing with these feelings and these rather severe anxiety disorders that haven't yet got an idea of what's going on. And so it was very important for me to write this book for my own self. I wrote this for my own 8-year-old, 10-year-old self who was turning to books and wasn't exactly finding the character who was speaking to me. And thankfully, we're all doing such a better job at opening this dialogue now, but this is, again, just contributing. And here I'll give you an idea. This is another note about games. And when Sara is dealing with these issues, she calls them games, and I'll explain why just now. And so she says, "Confused about games? Don't feel bad. I explained it to my doctor like 7 times. There are 3 different ones, in order of most common to least common: false alarm, the lead ball, and the danger game. False alarm is a fancy name for panic attacks. To be clear, they are real panic attacks, but the reason I get them is a total lie. Like my brain tells me I am dying. Of course I'm not really. And every time when the panic attack is over, I realize it was another false alarm. You'd think I would be ready, but my brain is a wonderful actor and makes me think I am dying every single time. And she does that during breakfast, or when I'm on the toilet, or in class, or in bed. And even when I say, "Can we please do this later?" she makes me play anyway. The next one is the lead ball. I got this name from A Christmas Carol. You know those ghosts with the lead balls and manacles? Well, sometimes it feels like I have chains strapped to me. But I still have to go to school, so I just grab the lead ball and drag it for as long as I can. I feel heavy almost all the time, but it gets worse some days, much worse. Dr. Ring says those are the depressive symptoms. And lastly, the danger game is a term for schizophrenic episodes. I don't get them much, only when I'm really tired. Some people have them all the time, Dr. Ring told me. In this one, instead of guessing if I'm dying, I have to guess if other people are trying to hurt me, and that's tricky, because I always think they are, and they never do. While the names, I don't know. I guess I like the idea of them being a game. It means that someday, maybe, I might just win. And so that's a bit of an entry into the way that she describes these. And again, that's her idea of calling them a game. And with O.C. Daniel, he also had these names for them, which reflects how a lot of us deal with this. You know, when he had what we call derealization, when he was phasing out a little bit, he'd call that the great space. When he got hit with a compulsion, he would call it a zap. So these types of things, if you deal with them, of course, they help us sort of address these issues. So again, this is Sara in the Search for Normal that I'm reading from right now, which will hit shelves, I suppose virtual shelves on June 4th and perhaps physical shelves at a later date. And this is a story, again, of Sara Malvern and her search for some level of normalcy and some level of identity as she is dealing with these issues and coming to terms with the fact that what's normal for her is not normal for the people that she sees. And I think that's such an important experience for all of us to identify. And I hope this book will do a lot of good for those who get to read it and perhaps lead them into O.C. Daniel as well. So again, to stress, I am taking questions as well. So if you do have questions that pop up, please do. I do have a couple more excerpts I can read and gladly will do so. But questions, of course, are even better in this particular area. And I'm just going to check now. Here we are. Just go down here. I know that this is also my first time ever doing Instagram Live, by the way. So it's a bit of a learning experience. Let's see right here. Okay. Unless I'm missing it, I don't see any questions as yet. I think that might mean I'm doing it wrong because I believe that there were some preloaded questions. So that makes me suspicious. However, if you want to save me, perhaps somebody watching can post a picture here, or a question rather, and that'll maybe ping into where I should be looking. But in the interim, let's do one more. And I love this little piece here because I think this will appeal perhaps to some of us Harry Potter fans as well. And this will be the last excerpt I read here. And so, as many of us probably did growing up and probably still do, Sara often turned to Harry Potter for a bit of comfort and for perhaps a bit of context. And this is just a little piece, again, where she's using Harry Potter for some context in her real life because she turns to this for comfort. And so this is a little excerpt again. This isn't a note, by the way. This is right up from the story. That night, I lay down in bed. I was finishing up Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone for the 11th time because I wanted to remember that people can look normal even when they're not. The truth, Dumbledore sighed, it is a beautiful and terrible thing and should therefore be treated with great caution. My door was open and my parents were talking from downstairs. Well, yelling. It's always my fault, isn't it? My mother was shouting. Of course it's your fault, my dad cried back. Who else? It takes 2 or 3. You drove me to this. Keep your voice down. There was a hard laugh. She knows just about everything around here. You know that. Not everything, my mother said. And whose fault is that? He replied. There was silence for a moment. How long can we go on like this? My mother asked. My father laughed again. Why don't you ask your date tomorrow? The door slammed and it was very quiet. I read on, because that's all there was to do, and stopped at a different line. if there is one thing Voldemort cannot understand, it is love. That makes two of us, I murmured. So just a little piece there. And again, she turns to Harry Potter throughout. So let's see, and now we have some questions. All right. You've spared me. Okay, so let's start here just in order. So the first one I see is this one. What was your favorite book when you were a kid? Wonderful question. Of course, Harry Potter, as you might have guessed, lends itself to this as well. My favorite, perhaps, kids' book growing up was called My Side of the Mountain. If you haven't read it, it's fantastic. And it's all about this kid who tries to set out on his own and live on a mountain. And it's sort of half fictional story, half survival guide. And it was sort of a wonderful way for a kid to dive in and think how I would do independently. So I always loved that story growing up. And it sparked a lot of my lifelong love for children's stories, which of course I still focus on today. And that sort of leads itself very nicely to this one, question from Fiona Kay here. Did you always want to be a writer? I suppose that's a yes and no. I loved writing always. I wrote almost every day from a young age, but I was hypercritical, and perhaps a lot of you can sympathize with this. I was so critical of my writing that the mere notion of sharing it with someone would give me anxiety, to the extent that I didn't even share it with my own parents, my siblings, nobody. And this sort of hypercriticism defined a lot of my writing career growing up and continued all the way up into high school. And only through the final intervention of a teacher in grade 12 who sort of happened upon, by complete luck, some of my writing and became sort of a mentor and a coach. Her name was Miss Slater, Rochelle Slater. That impact, that influence of this teacher is what pushed me towards finally sharing my work. And I needed that. And that's why I'm always sort of passionate in going around to schools and speaking to people to try and give writers, that little push. Because a lot of us, again, are so self-critical that it's very difficult to not only begin a book, but then to keep that self-confidence up and finish. I find a lot of us can start a book, few of us can finish it. And not because some are better than others, not because you're a better writer or a worse writer. It's simply maintaining that self-confidence to dive in and finally tell your story. All right, let's see here. Got another question popping up here. All right, what's your favorite? Oh, well, actually, I see one question I came across and it just said what, which I think is actually probably the true question. Or maybe that's just a feeling of what is happening here. But we'll move on to that in case they're just going to fix that one. I see one here from Dylan Price, who I happen to know very well. And he says, what's your favorite book you've written? Hi, Dylan, by the way. You're back in Milton, I presume, today, hopefully enjoying a little sunshine. My favorite book I've written, that's a good question. I, of course, really like Sara and the Search for Normal. I really was attached to O.C. Daniel, the story that was before that, because that was a personal story. And I also have with me my other very recent book that came out, which is called Season 1. And I wrote this with Kobe Bryant, which was, of course, I've done 100 interviews on the process of writing with Kobe and the incredible experience that it was. So I didn't want to talk too much about that here today. But this is a really good book right now for those of us who are feeling cooped up, who are needing a little inspiration. This isn't just a basketball book. It's more of a psychological book. It's more of a book about facing our fears and our self-doubts and succeeding in spite of them. So this is also a really, again, a timely book that I'm proud of right now. And this, as well as with Training Camp, which I have right beside me, made up the Wizenard Series that Kobe and I put together and that we were very proud of, and which I'm glad to see is still continuing on and honoring his legacy of storytelling. Which was cut off too soon, frankly, but he had already accomplished a lot and made some stories that we're very proud of. Thanks for the question, Dylan. Let's just see here. Joins with your writer, favorite book when you were a kid. What was your favorite video when you were a kid? I presume probably you mean in terms of what was my favorite movie, because there was videos were more of an ethereal thing back that time. But my favorite movie growing up was Star Wars, Star Wars A New Hope. I'm a massive Star Wars fan. I'm a big fantasy sci-fi guy. That lends itself a lot into my writing as well. My current work in progress is diving back into the fantasy world, and a lot of my books from the past, Dragons vs. Drones, Laura Monster Crusher, The Vindico, these were very high fantasy and science fiction type novels, and I love those types of stories. so that still lends itself. So Star Wars was my favorite growing up. Lord of the Rings, all these types of things I love. I just finished reading the Witcher series. And then I've totally 180 now and reading Whisper Network by Chandler Baker, and as well listening to audiobooks, which I do more and more. So thank you again for the question, and I see another one popping up here. I don't want to go over my time, but let's just see here. What was your favorite? Good question here. What was your favorite experience of working with Kobe? Well, there was, so many. I think, I guess perhaps it's a better summary because there were so many experiences. My favorite experience of working with Kobe was the infectious enthusiasm and self-belief that he had and which he gave to you. Every time I spoke with him, every time we texted, every exchange we had was positive, and you left that exchange feeling better. That really set a standard for how maybe we all should deal with the relationships in our lives and say, how can I leave every communication by making the other person feel better? And he had this gift. He would end a conversation by telling you were a genius, or that you were brilliant, or that you were going to go and crush this next thing. So there was always this really infectious sort of hype man personality, which if you guys have tried to writing is half existential crisis and doubt and thinking that I'm the worst writer that's ever existed and this is the worst book that's ever existed. That's sometimes 75% of the process and getting over that. So Kobe was well suited to that. He was always sort of pushing you beyond that point. And the Wizenard series is full of these sort of optimistic, insightful ideas about how we can face these self-critical fears and become the people that we're meant to be. And I think this is a good time to do that. Because we're all spending an awful lot of time being introspective and reflective right now, and we're going to get back into the real world soon, and let's come out swinging, I guess, would be the idea. So that's very much what the Wizenard series is about. So thank you for the question. That was a wonderful question. I love talking about the process. I just simply wasn't sure if maybe I've out-talked, but I think one of the great things is Kobe left behind this legacy, and people like to talk about that. So we are coming about to the end of my allotted time, but let me just check if there are any more. I think there's more questions, but they're sort of ones about favorite books and about writing and stuff like that, which I believe we did touch on. So let's just begin to close there. And again, I want to say thank you for the Harbourfront Festival, to TIFA, the Toronto International Festival of Authors, and for Virtually Junior, which is hosting not just writers, but performers. And, I was watching performers or singers. There's all kinds of great things happening, creative outlets that are happening in a virtual sense, and which hopefully are coming at you and inspiring you to do the same. That's, ultimately the process here. So thank you to all three of those organizations for taking the time to put this on, to give us a little bit of a chance to communicate with each other in this sort of strange virtual world that we find ourselves in. And I look forward to seeing more of what's to come this weekend. I hope you do as well. Thank you again for joining me, and have a wonderful long weekend.